From beach towels to tea towels, and from mugs to water bottles, the TNT shop has it all. Browse our shop now at tntradio.live. Perception versus the truth. This is Connecting the Dots with Matt Ehret on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
All right, welcome back to Connecting the Dots. This is your third hour, and I've got to say that last week I was on a platform discussing the origins, the nature of the shadow government, and I was one of the other people who was speaking on this platform was a fellow named Brady. Brady is a geopolitical analyst. He goes by the name Warhamster, as in nom de guerre. Has a very, very interesting collection of videos, presentations, and I've really come to appreciate Brady's analysis on this very important topic that affects all of our lives, and especially since in our previous hour we were alluding to with Professor Trusudovsky the nature of empire as relying upon economic warfare and the illusion of capitalism without any of the real substance of what made capitalism viable in the first place, which is creating capital, creating opportunities. That part isn't so important for people like Klaus Schwab or the World Economic Forum freaks, who like using it simply as a cover to advance feudalism and the destruction, ironically, of capital. So Brady has done a lot of work on this. Brady, thank you for being our third guest today.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. And I got to humbly say that a lot of my homework came from watching some of Matt's shows. And, he led me down some great rabbit holes. And I just, went a little bit deeper than most. And so I appreciate all you do, Matt.
Fantastic. Well, this is a great little dance of the intellect, so I'm really, really happy that we can both give and share. And I'm sure that I'm going to be taking notes, as I always do when I listen to you speak. You have been putting forth some of your research and analysis regarding the role of how multinational corporations are able to utilize legalese to justify favoring their benefits over nation states. Could you elaborate on your findings, your thoughts on this important topic?
Yeah, it comes from a lot of different angles, and they never stop doing it. It's one of those things where you can't whack them all, every single one of these schemes. But what they've basically done is you've got these technocrats, lawyers, international lawyers, and they craft trade deals. And in all of these trade deals, there'll be about 400 pages of language that are creating something that goes along with it's called the ISDS, Investor State Dispute Settlement. And it's a way of legally leveraging investor rights over the sovereign rights of people who live in their own countries. It's something that really started to be put in place post-World War II, but didn't really pick up steam until after the Cold War.
So you're saying this is built into the GATT system, like the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or did this come in later on after that?
You'd see it, and it would have been in TTIP. It was in NAFTA, in CAFTA, all of those trades. Okay. Every single one of these trade deals, and there's hundreds of them. The lawyers get to work, and they basically your country is signing away its sovereign rights, and you don't really have a whole lot of choice, because if you're going to enter into the Western banking system, coming out of the Cold War, or from behind the Soviet wall, or these Latin American companies have finally got and African companies just got their independence post World War II. If you want to be beneficiary of the IMF or the World Bank, you are de facto signing these trade deals. And the language for these ISDS, investor state dispute settlements, are written in every single one of them. And, I'll put it out there right now, we saw the establishment, deep state, whatever you want to call it, the cartel, the cabal, the whatever we want to call this ruling hand. They spent a lot of time and effort to try to take out Donald Trump. And I would suggest that his pulling out of trade deals and recrafting NAFTA was a big part of that, why they wanted, because there's trillions of dollars at stake. I mean, this is not a small thing. This is really how the multinational corporations leverage what they call international law, even though there's no such thing, basically to steal your sovereign rights. And there's a whole lot of examples of this.
Yeah, a lot of people, they will tend to, I think, oversimplify what Trump was and dismiss him as just another creature of the system, fake controlled opposition, and not really pay too much time looking at, well, what was he doing on the issue of dealing with the problem of NAFTA? A lot of these people don't even know what NAFTA really was in the first place, let alone what his battle was against it, what he did, or the TPP on the Pacific front. Could you elaborate a little bit more about like what was NAFTA, and how did Trump? What did he do to obstruct or to create something different?
Um, yeah, NAFTA is, it's one of many trade deals, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And anytime they
Yep.
say free trade, you probably want to, put up a little bit of a caution flag, because what they call free trade is anything but. These free trade agreements are carve-outs for the multinational corporations, those people who sit closest to the seats of power or the negotiators, and they get carve-outs. It's like protective tariffs. This goes back hundreds of years. It's just a modern version of the protective tariff. And you can make an argument for or against tariffs, but when you're favoring one business over others, this is not free trade. It's just the opposite. And NAFTA is just like all the others. I think the TTIP that Trump halted, was that the one that was going to, was it the Asia American one?
Yeah, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is what you're thinking of, I think. That was isolating China and just like trying to lock everybody in the Pacific around this new free trade deal.
Yep. Yeah. So when you hear free trade, that's you want to read the fine print, because it's anything but. The history is interesting.
Right.
In
what way? How is free trade used? Because I know that there's it's not like, just like protectionism, there could be a good application or bad application depending upon context. But in what way have empires utilized free trade, or protectionism for that matter, as a cover for benefiting themselves at the expense of nation states?
You want me to talk modern or historically?
Historically. Anyway.
Well, historically, we know about the British East India Company, and anybody connected with that. They were able to get special carve-outs, special trading rights, special permissions. And we talked about it the other day. The difference between a pirate and a privateer is a piece of paper. Right. It's the same concept. They're just legalizing, what would otherwise be illegal, because they have a document that says they can. That's really what all these free trade agreements are. The ISDS are particularly insidious, because, again, if you're a country coming out of the cold, joining the modern banking system, and you want to be eligible for World Bank or IMF loans, you have to sign these deals. There was a Nazi banker by the name of Herman Abs, and he made a famous speech in 1957 calling for a quote-unquote capitalist Magna Carta. And basically, what was happening at the time is, you saw in 1953 the CIA tried to take out Mosaddegh in Iran. In 1954, the CIA had to take out the president of Guatemala because he was trying to redistribute land back to the peasants. In 56, you had President Nasser in Egypt was trying to nationalize the Suez Canal. Well, these multinational corporations are losing control, and they realize they've got to do something. And that's why they started putting these trade deals and crafting them the way they did. Post-Cold War, they were in place during the Cold War, but it's only post-Cold War that they really started to explode. And that's because you saw all these former nations in Eastern Europe that were behind the Iron Curtain were joining the civilized nations of the West. And they had to join this joint economic globalist system. And it came with a lot of strings attached.
Is this what we hear when we hear about IMF or World Bank conditionalities? Is this the sort of thing that we're talking about here?
That's exactly it, Matt. That's exactly what it is. They basically force you to sign these deals. And there's if you live in some of these countries like El Salvador, or other countries that have been victims of private corporations suing you, basically what'll happen is a government will try to put some regulations in place, like, okay, your mining practices are dangerous to local population, so we want you to put some safety measures in, so you don't get to pollute the rivers or towns. And these corporations will basically be able to go to an international court and say, look, you are damaging my future potential to make money as an investor. That's why it's called an investor-state dispute settlement. And it's really hard to quantify how much you're losing in this. But it's heard before a three-panel appellate group, whatever. These are non-elected, just appointed judges. There is no appeals process whatsoever. And sometimes the settlements reach in hundreds of millions of dollars. It gets more fun. There's a great story. I forget the name of the company, but it was an American company, was getting regulated by California, and they couldn't use an ISDS or the American courts to sue for their rights. So they went up to Canada, started a subsidiary, and sued the state of California under the ISDS agreement as a foreign entity, and got paid like $18 million in future losses, income loss. So it's pretty sketchy how this stuff works.
Wow. Wow. I'm wondering when Trump came in, and I know that was an all-out brawl for several years to scrap NAFTA and reorganize the whole thing. I know one of the things that Chrystia Freeland went, she went and complained to the World Trade Organization that he was infringing on the I guess the program within NAFTA, which nobody seems to have even read. There was executive summaries, but even to this day, the thousands and thousands of pages that go into NAFTA have remained classified. Nobody except for like a people like a grouping of initiates permitted to sort of seize. I don't know what gives them security clearance, but all that to say that within those secret files were protocols that banned things like the use of national protectionism, which was what Trump was bringing in as one of those elements. Was there anything else? Like, what was that story about? What was that battle? What was Trump bringing in that replaced it with the U.S., Canada, Mexico trade agreement? How is it different from NAFTA?
Well, I think a lot of those trade deals were, I think what he did is more what he got rid of than what he added. He eliminated an awful lot of the carve-outs with the New Deal. It's been a while since I went deep into the new agreement, since obviously that's sort of been shelved in the meantime. Although I think that trade agreement, the trade Trump put in place, is still intact, and it seems to be beneficial for them.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? What I always look at is where the opposition to Trump came from, and who's supporting these trade deals. And an awful lot of the anti-Trump money here in the U.S. comes from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who ostensibly is supposed to represent all businesses, but at its core, it's follow the money. It's these multinational corporations that we all know their names. And now it's a lot of the tech companies have an awful lot of sway when it comes to what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce does. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is really at the fort of the opposition to Trump's policies. And that probably should not be the case. I mean, how many people can even name the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce? He's one of the most powerful people in America. And
Great point.
It is the biggest lobbyist for the Republican Party, is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So
no, it's humbling, to think about. It's sobering, maybe not humbling, sobering to think about the power that the World Trade Organization and these international trade courts. I didn't even know about the ISDS until you brought it up to me. Have in terms of giving more power to private entities over entire nations, sovereign nations, or states within nations that are mandated to protect the people, and are that's why we have nation states, is to protect, is for the nation to organize sovereign individuals to select representation to defend themselves and their interests against the British East India Company and against these private nominally private oligarchs that have done so much damage for thousands of years. That's why we have the modern nation state. So to have this arbitrary innovation that's been brought online that empowers this oligarchy to do this type of damage under the framework of law. I guess is this what you would think of when we hear people like Biden talking about the rules of the rules-based international order? Is that what he's talking about?
That absolutely, it ties right into that. What do they call it? The rules-based, transatlantic rules-based post-World War II society. They got all these nice little acronyms for this stuff, but that really it's what came out of. What was the name of the economic framework when the U.S. dollar became the hegemon?
Oh, the Bretton Woods.
Thank you. Why do I forget that one? That's some common one. I'll give you a great example of just how insidious this kind of power is. In South Africa, it's been about 15, 20 years ago, they were basically going to these mining companies, other multinational mining companies, and saying, look, we're going to redistribute some of your company, like 30% needs to go to the indigenous people who've suffered under your irresponsible practices. And, South African government is, it's communist. Redistribution is not a great thing. But as you say correctly, they are a sovereign nation state and they can make their own laws in their own country. Well, there was a mining company out of the Netherlands that threatened to sue South Africa under this ISDS, said, look, you're going to give away 30% of our company. We're going to, we need hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation for our future profits. It's right here in this treaty. Not only did South Africa settle with them, but they kept it quiet. And the reason they did that is they didn't want other companies to get the idea that they could blackmail the government of South Africa. Now, I mentioned El Salvador earlier. Well, you ask anybody from El Salvador, they know exactly what an ISDS is because they fought back against it and went public. Their government absolutely fought back. And so, you have an uneducated El Salvadorian knows about these international trade agreements, but you have lawyers here in the United States have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's very real. And you just have to read the trade agreements. They're there.
Yeah. No, that's good. And when we come back from a quick break on TNTRadio.live, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to also introduce the green agenda a little bit into this, since I'm sensing that this is going to play into the discussion quite a bit. So we're going to come back after a short break, TNTRadio.live.
TNT's Bruce Torres.
The WHO's proposed treaty will increase man-made pandemics, by Merrill Nass. Just a minute about this. This report is designed to help readers think about some big topics. How to really prevent pandemics and biological warfare. How to assess proposals by the WHO and its members for responding to pandemics. And whether we can rely on our health officials to navigate these areas in ways that make sense and will help their populations. We start with a history of biological arms control and rapidly move to the COVID pandemic, eventually arriving at plans to protect the future. She didn't put protect in quotes, but I just did verbally.
World Stage and Bruce Torres on today's News Talk, TNT.
JDRF's vision is to create a world without type 1 diabetes. The type 1 diabetes community is at the heart of everything JDRF does. We were founded by the type 1 diabetes community. In the main, we are governed by the type 1 diabetes community, we're energised by the type 1 community, and we're accountable to the type 1 diabetes community. It's on their behalf that we exist, and it's on their behalf that we must succeed. JDRF exists to rid the world of type 1 diabetes. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do. So for us, that means rallying all the resources and all the people and all the organisations required to make that a reality as quickly as possible. The world's best researchers, exciting innovative companies, and the passion of the type 1 diabetes community, then delivered through the health system so lives get better every day, day after day, until the day we find a cure. To everybody in the type 1 diabetes community, no matter your age or stage with the disease, whether you were diagnosed recently or a long time ago, we need you to know that we are here working on your behalf to deliver a world without type 1 diabetes as quickly as we can. Thank you to everybody who supported JDRF in so many ways. You are making our vision of a world without type 1 diabetes possible.
Today's News Talk Radio.
I do a lot of streaming radio.
I do a lot of free streaming.
TNTRadio.live.
All right, welcome back to Connecting the Dots on TNTRadio.live. I'm here joined by Brady, aka Warhamster, geopolitical analyst and historian. Brady, before the break, you were saying something that I found just very, very interesting and I think so important for people to think about regarding how empire has manifested itself. Like we've been told, empire was a problem before World War II, and then the world went free, and all of the former nations of the British Empire got their independence, and yeah, we got some problems of empire now and again, but overall, it's been free, and a lot of these people they drink a lot of official narratives and propaganda from their school textbooks, and don't see that the World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization have been actually the hand of empire, the financial warfare needed to keep nations underdeveloped artificially, whether Africa, Latin America, or anywhere, and keep corporate private interests, banking and corporate alike, above the influence of the sovereign nation states of this world. They just don't know. They've been so miseducated. So I love what you're doing, but something you said really shocked me, which is that it is possible to sue in court as a private enterprise against a government that might want to develop infrastructure, a dam, or build a bridge in an area that might disrupt an ecosystem, because that corporation could say, well, that ecosystem that might be disrupted has a certain amount of potential value that I am going to lose out on if that dam is built, providing electricity to the people, or that whatever, right? Name a point of infrastructure that would be beneficial to the people. And so a court will rule against the nation that either that can't happen, you're not allowed, or that you have to pay that X amount of money to that company, which is not going to do anything. They're just total win for that private company and a total lose for the nation that otherwise has a bunch of people being represented. This seems to flow directly. This seems to merge these two, what I often see treated as two different ideas of eco-imperialism and financial imperialism. It seems to be that these are united now increasingly as two sides of the same blob. Is that a fair characterization?
No, that's more than fair. In fact, it's really impressive how you connected those dots, because that's exactly where I was going to be going with it, because that's 100% the case. You hear this climate alarmism, which is it's basically, if we say we're doing something to save the planet, to make it green and everything like that, we can get away with an awful lot of monopolization of the world's resources. And this, it all stems back from the old mercantilist vision that we have finite resources, and it is basically a mercantilist job is to gather under Caesar that which is Caesar's. It's a giant land grab and a resource grab, and they do it under the guise of climate alarmism. In 2021, the New York Stock Exchange proposed a rule change. They wanted to create a new type of investment vehicle called an NAC, which is a natural asset company. Basically, the idea is you name it, they call it nature's economy. And they were basically trying to securitize the air you breathe, the water you drink, the fruit you grow. They want to securitize this. And basically what they do, you get a bunch of investors together. They claim they create a natural asset company, an NAC. And basically they own, let's say, all the water rights of Brazil. Well, the people of Brazil are supposed to own their own water rights, but they're basically assuming the sovereign status of that, or sovereign oversight of that, and they can securitize it. To put it into perspective, the global economy right now is about $500 trillion. All securities in the world, all the stock exchanges, bond exchanges, the NACs are supposed to represent $4 quadrillion worth of market potential. And they put this forward as a new rule change and try to put these into place. The Rockefellers were one of the three parties involved in that, shockingly. And
shocking.
About 3 or 4 weeks ago, they pulled the application off the table. The NACs are now dead on arrival. I've been talking about them for a few months. Whitney Webb has done some great work on this back in 2021. So if you want to read more about that, go look up Whitney Webb. I think she's probably done the best, but enough people put pressure on these globalists that they actually had to pull this one off the table. So we did get one victory there, but it doesn't mean they're not going to try it again. It was just the same idea of you remember when they were trying to do the climate exchanges, the carbon exchanges. Mm-hmm. Most people don't know that Barack Obama was one of the original investors in the Chicago Climate Exchange in the early 2000s. That's now defunct, but the idea was they were going to create a market out of nowhere with these carbon credits. And so they want to monetize, securitize the very air you breathe. And that was on the table, and that one's still probably going to show up again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this question of potential is such an important but easily abused concept. And in Vladimir Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson, he made an allusion. He made a point regarding the question of economic value and the difference in paradigm regarding he's specifically speaking at the time about the Russian relationship with China, based on looking for points of compromise, points of production, creation that would benefit all sides. And China's different philosophy from that of the West. And he cited Bismarck. And he said, look, Bismarck made the point, everything is potential. And it's true. Like, potential is key, because it's like what hasn't been done yet. That's the place where our creativity, our minds, our discoveries that we haven't made yet lives in that domain of potential. But in that domain of potential is also a lot of destruction, right? The lack of those discoveries, the ignorance and the outcome of ignorant actions. So it seems like what you're saying is that this particular natural asset company and the green definition of value is tied more to the potential not to do things, like to keep whole regions of the ecosystem or the world out of the domain of the economy, such that we're putting value on things that we're gonna not touch. The more we don't touch them, the more the value increases. Or inversely, I guess if a mining company wants to, they could just like take control of national territory because they're stakeholders and they should just own the this region of Amazon jungle or the lithium fields below it, because it's somehow going to protect nature. I guess it seems like all of this is sort of just benefiting these rapacious companies that are destroying nature by putting a value on reducing the carbon footprint. It's kind of weird, right?
Yeah, well, you just follow the money. Who are the people that are donating to these NGOs that give you the guise of, being a green agenda? It's a cover. It's a cover for it's basically modern day piracy. What they're doing is they're trying to get all the resources under themselves.
Right.
Give you another fun example. Something most people haven't heard about it. It's called GFANZ, GFANZ. That's the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And anytime you hear net zero, again, big warning sign. So GFANZ was a conference launched in 2021. John Kerry, the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, or he was, he just stepped down from that role. And you know who stepped into it?
I believe the Pedro Podesta.
Yep, that's the one. I figured you'd know. Yeah, John Podesta, Hillary's former campaign manager, is now running a point on climate. Janet Yellen was involved, and of course, Mark Carney was the former Bank of England and Bank of Canada chair. So they're all involved. You've got about they love their acronyms, Matt. They really do. One of the things they created was called the Net Zero Banking Alliance, NZBA. And to put that into perspective, the NZBA, the banks behind it, control 43% of all global banking assets. What they're aiming to do is further corporatize multilateral development banks, MDBs. MDBs are like the World Bank. They've long been criticized for trapping developed nations in debt and then using that debt to force those nations to deregulate markets, specifically financial markets. They talk about stakeholder capitalism, which you brought up. Real quick, let me tell you the top players at GFANZ, because you're going to hear some familiar names. BlackRock, Citibank,
Of course.
Bank of America, Banco Santander, the biggest money laundering bank, HSBC, and of course, the David Rockefeller Fund. Wow. Rockefellers are always going to be involved in this stuff.
Real rogues gallery.
Yeah. I mean, and we know about how they, these IMF loans are used to impoverish third world countries. And I think that's something you talk quite a bit about when you talk about how China and the Brick and Road is doing something not quite as insidious or onerous. They actually get these companies a chance not to be stomped on under debt that you can never get out of.
Yeah, no, it's a different philosophy, and for anybody who's still confused about that, I suggest check out the Tucker Carlson Putin discussion from a couple of days ago. It's really important because Putin actually took the time to unpack and educate a Western audience about what is China. He did a very effective job at getting across this different paradigm and conception of economic value that is animating the building of things like the Belt and Road Initiative, which is very different from things that we used to do things like that. I mean, I've read stories before I was born, and probably before you were born too. There was like an ethic of building real things in the real world and increasing productivity that was tied to our idea of a healthier form of capitalism, and that's long gone. Like, we have totally lost it. So it's really, like I said, sobering to hear you just describe in this summary fashion just how this sleight of hand happened, because it's not like we went straight from industrial capitalism into feudalism just like that. There's been a gradualism, and it seems like the fact that they spread it out over the course of a few decades of globalization has resulted in people kind of being more adaptive, more mushy, more incapable of identifying how we lost our sensibilities and gave into this whole thing, right? I mean, if they had done this quicker, we probably wouldn't have fallen for it.
No, that's a great point. It's death by a thousand cuts. If you were to come out and say, here's what America is going to be in 10 years from now, everyone would have said, no, not just no, but hell no. But if you just incrementally do it, and you hear about people that are threats to our institutions, well, good. These institutions are not doing what they say they're doing. We need more people that are threats to them.
Yeah.
You brought up an interesting term, stakeholder capitalism, and that's a topic I need to. When I start writing my Substack, it's going to be one of the first articles I write. I've done a little bit of homework on this because you're supposed to have shareholder capitalism, not stakeholder. And stakeholder capitalism came out of the Green Revolution of the 1970s, once again backed by Rockefellers. Philosophically, this one's near and dear to my heart. Thomas Jefferson, who I admire quite a bit, wrote it's the pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, he took that from a century before John Locke, who originally wrote life, liberty, and property. Now, if we still had property in our Declaration of Independence instead of the pursuit of happiness, stakeholder capitalism would never have been allowed. When they say stakeholder, if you own shares in a company, Matt, that comes with some voting rights. It comes with some obligations, liability, and voting rights. Stakeholder capitalism gives some of those rights to people that have no skin in the game, as opposed to shareholder capitalism, and it's used by companies like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And a really interesting thing happened in the 1980s. If you go open up a brokerage account and you buy stock in AT&T, let's say you only have 100 shares. Well, you get to vote those 100 shares. That is one of the rights of being a shareholder. If you were to instead put your money in a BlackRock ETF, BlackRock assumes the proxy voting right, and they are actually usurping your shareholder rights. You are a fund holder, but you still have a percentage in the equity that fund owns AT&T. You still have it, but BlackRock and those companies now have the ability to vote your proxy. So you hear people talk about, BlackRock's the biggest shareholder of XYZ company. Well, that's not true. Their fund is the biggest shareholder, but the people that own shares of the fund are the actual beneficial owners. So that's something that's actually being worked on to this day. And we saw some really good news. These ESG funds that were being pushed the last 5 years, they've seen outflows of millions of dollars. People are not investing.
For those who don't know,
funds.
what does an ESG fund stand for?
Environmental, social, and governmental score. And basically, are you hiring the right amount of people of color? Are you hiring the right, are you pushing all these woke agendas? Most importantly, what are you doing working towards net zero? And net zero is, of course, zero carbon, which is ridiculous because we need carbon to live. So ESG funds are on the way out. In fact, BlackRock and State Street are both closing up their ESG funds. They are going to be coming back. They'll rebrand it with a different name. But as of right now, that's another way us pushing back against this stuff. It's working. And more importantly, these ESG funds were losing money. They were bad investments. And that's why a lot of people left money. But we had several state governments, several states in America have basically kicked out the BlackRocks out of their state pension system because of the ESG issue.
Yeah, no, that's interesting to see some pushback and fight back. I like that. And before we've got about 2 minutes for our next commercial break, and I want to just ask you quickly, isn't it also a bit of I'm not against shareholder capitalism as well, but within certain conditions at the same time, because it seems to me that left unto itself, if you have like this total, like what Kissinger and Zbigniew and George Shultz brought online in the early 70s, if you have this whole like logic of no national regulation, no protectionism, just complete free for all, anything goes, it kind of seems like if you're a multi-billionaire or trillionaire, then you would be able to very easily take advantage of that type of shareholder system and just buy up all of the shares anyway and get complete dominance like a little dictator under the guise of capitalism of whatever corporation you want to control, and just nudge out all of the smaller players who were smaller shareholders. Wouldn't that just be like a lawful? Wouldn't global empire and the Davos sort of global octopus not be a natural outcome of that sort of laissez-faire?
Well, that's exactly what happened. That's why that's the whole cartel system they put in place.
So what kind of guarantees do we have to keep that in check in a reasonable way?
That's a good question. I'll answer on the other side of the break. But
that's great. You're more responsible than I am. All right, let's do that. So let's go for a quick break, and we'll come back on TNTRadio.live.
De-weaponizing weather with reality and perspective.
The cyclone that's in the north of Australia is kind of unusual for an El Nino season. That's because we have not really had an El Nino season this year in Australia. The Southern Oscillation Index, the longest running measure of the ENSO, or El Nino, La Nina, has not cooperated at all. And we knew this was a problem way back in the Northern Hemisphere fall and our spring, because we weren't seeing a lot of typhoons. Usually when you have a big El Nino, you have a lot of typhoons going off, and we had the third lowest typhoon production on record, so something funky was going on. However, that Southern Oscillation Index is going to crash for the month of February, which means that our fall should be average in Australia. Now, I'm bringing all this up because that crash in February is linked to severe cold in the United States and Europe for February into March. And we're seeing another ferocious storm attacking Norway now. A lot of heavy rain is coming into Europe over the next week. Now, the two times that happened, it turned frigid in Europe. Same thing is going to happen. Mid-February to mid-March will be frigid in Europe. You see all these storms crashing into the United States? Well, guess what? It's going to turn frigid in the United States. In fact, for much of the United States, the worst of the winter is on the way. And just think, it all hinges on looking at the weather around Australia. Isn't that nice? Hands across the water. Australia, the States, and Europe. Kumbaya. This is TNT climate and weather watchdog meteorologist Joe Bastardi asking you to enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you've got.
People might tell you that Lyme doesn't kill people, but we are losing people. People disappear from their lives.
One of the scariest things that I had to deal with was memory loss. Not just like I don't remember what I did last week, but like I forgot all the words to my own songs. I remember going to my primary care physician and he was like, "You are 100% healthy, there's nothing wrong with you." And my response was, "That's impossible, I'm dying."
I wasn't working, so I had all of these hospital bills. We had to move out of our home and move into my parents' basement.
I just wish I could have truly been present in those big moments, you know, when she took her first steps or, you know, her first day of preschool. Lyme is such a thief and it goes undetected because no one is looking for it.
For more information and prevention tips, go to projectlyme.org.
Matt Ehret and Connecting the Dots on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, we're back for the third segment of the third hour with Brady, a.k.a. Warhamster, and we've been discussing the financialization of the world and how finance capitalism has been merged with imperialism to create one giant feudalistically oriented behemoth, which is all kinds of ugly. And by understanding it, the idea is that we would be less inclined to acquiesce to it, to fall for the traps. I want to ask you today, in our final little segment here, about your thoughts regarding some of the resistance that we're seeing both on the national levels, but also amongst the farmers, the citizens organizing in some interesting ways across Europe. In North America, we've seen different examples of some organization in a positive way for the survival of Western civilization. I would say, I don't want to be grandiose here, but I think that's what it is. And also, your thoughts a little bit more on the question of what we were just talking about before the break, regarding what kind of safeguards do we have available, since we all kind of have a sense increasingly of how sick the system is and what an incompetent and or evil expression of capitalism looks like, but we lack a sense of like, well, what does a more healthy expression of national capitalism look like? What sort of mechanisms do we have to work with that would guarantee something that would unite national interest, the collective good, with private benefits and the sacredness of the individual liberty? which is, I guess, always the balance, right? To find a way that both can harmonize. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've given this one a lot of thought, and you're asking a great question. When you get to this kind of pervasive corruption that's throughout the world, it's got to be structural. So let's take a look at the structures. These multinational corporations, everyone talks about corporations, but what is a corporation? It's a limited liability corporation. So we've created a legal structure where these entities can get 100% of the benefits of ownership and take none of the risk of bad decisions or harming other people. So the history behind that's interesting. Post-Civil War in America, we had the Gilded Age, excuse me, and the robber barons were able to create these vast cartels and monopolies. And I say cartel because I think it's more accurate than monopoly. Cartels when a group basically decides to collude together, and it exists for two purposes. Why would you create a cartel? Well, you want to maximize your own benefit, but more importantly, you want to eliminate competition. And they do this through government regulation. And that's why corporations donate to politicians. That's why we have lobbyists. They want to write rules that benefit their small favorite group of the cartel members and make it very difficult, create barriers to entry for any competition. Coming out of the Gilded Age, these robber barons, the biggest wealth disparity in American history, even more so than we see today, although it's getting close, the difference between the billionaires and the peasants. They had what were called trusts. And these Teddy Roosevelt comes in and said he busted the trusts. He's the trust buster. Well, nothing of the sort even happened. These companies were reorganized under a new corporate structure, a legal entity that became what is known as the modern corporation. The first U.S. corporation was United States Steel, created in 1913 by our favorite law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, working with J.P. Morgan. And so now you have owners that have basically no liability for the actions of their entities. Now, if you were to, hypothetically, if you were to strip that liability from corporate owners, they would almost be forced to act more responsibly. You would see a number of the downhill effects of that would be really interesting. If you're the major shareholder of a corporation, now without your limited liability, you're going to act more responsibly, but you're also going to have to take out umbrella liability insurance to protect yourself in case something goes wrong with the company.
Yeah.
The insurance companies are then going to get involved in all the lawsuits. You're going to find a legal system that's far more efficient, far less expensive, and you're not going to see some of the more ridiculous litigation. It would have a huge downhill effect if you strip some of that liability.
It's absolutely, and you just see it with Big Pharma as well, right? Like if you just allowed Big Pharma to pay the price for their, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say incompetence in trying to rush a product out that results in fatalities or sickness or anything else. Imagine people are allowed to sue a pharmaceutical company for something that's been put out as a vax. Oh my God, like that would be a game changer. Or imagine that if you allowed a too big to fail. What if you allowed a bank to actually fail for making a bad bet? Just allow it. Like how would that change so much, right?
Yeah, it's creative destruction and it works. It used to work, at least. It's what we had once upon a time, before the era of bailouts and the whole concept of too big to fail. And of course, Big Pharma would never do anything like you suggest, but because they care about our health. Yeah, you get these executives, not just the ownership, the executives that make these decisions that do untold amounts of harm, and they face no liability for their actions whatsoever. So I think we should address that structure. And I'm not talking about a free for all of frivolous lawsuits to happen, but change the structure. Incentive right now, the incentive structure, I guess, is wrong, and it allows poor decisions to be made by the richest people in the world, and they don't necessarily have our best interests at heart.
Yeah. Well, definitely the people are calling out. We saw it with the truckers convoy in Ottawa that did have massive reverberations regarding the policies of the medical dictatorship, but we've also seen it regarding farmer protests all across Belgium, Germany, France, you name it. There's just massive protests where these people are now recognizing that there is an agenda to destroy food production. We see it clearly, and we see an actual mobilization against that, and we're seeing to what degree we're going to get some reverberation within the elected representation of the people. I'm still waiting for that. I could see that there are members of the European Parliament, members within various governments of Europe that want to do something. They need the people to back them up. The people also need to run for office. I think that's also a factor in it. But it is compelling to see this fight back. In the case of the United States, where you live, what is your take right now on the terrain? Obviously, Biden has no brain; it's jelly. He called the president of Egypt or the president of Mexico El Sisi or something. So that's not viable. Nikki Haley just I forget which state just had their a little bit of a Republican vote to see who would represent as a Republican candidate. Was it Delaware? No, it wasn't Delaware. Nebraska.
Nevada,
and it
Nevada,
was
none of the above.
no, it was
Yeah.
Nevada, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Where she got like 31% of the vote, and none of the above got 62% of the vote, which is hilarious. It seems like the wave is really behind Trump's taking thing or basically winning. What is your take on the current situation in the United States? Does Trump have a chance? Do you think that there's what are his biggest challenges that he has to deal with right now?
Well, the question is, if we had a in-person ballot system and we knew the elections were going to be 100% straight up, I think Trump would win, blown away, running away with it. I worked with a lot of election integrity groups over the last 4 years, and a lot of steps have been made locally. You're going to have more secure elections in many ways. We've tightened up some of the election laws. There's still too much mail-in balloting, too much mail-in voting, and until that goes away, you're not going to have real secure results. But it's looking, right now from the top down, Trump has a really good chance of winning. I think even more importantly is what's happening locally. Do enough people locally, grassroots efforts to get people at the local, state level and the state legislatures? Because at the end of the day, what's happened is this huge federal government. The United States has the biggest government in the history of mankind. They're spending $4 or $5 trillion a year. It's ridiculous. The Pentagon is the world's biggest office building. That's not what the limited government was supposed to be. And the only way that can be taken back is by the states themselves, because at the end of the day, the Constitution, it is a contract between the states. They created a central government, for very specific, limited reasons. And we can get that power back by acting locally. What Texas is doing right now is very encouraging. We're starting to see people, Google searches are going way up on the ideas of nullification and states' rights. And so I think it has to be locally. But I think Trump is, the momentum's all on his side. I track Real Clear Politics, tracks all the different polls, and I keep a spreadsheet of it to notice the trends. He just keeps trending up, and as Biden's disapproval goes down and down. Do I think Biden will be the candidate in 2024? Probably not. Democrats have a bit of a dilemma, though. They've got to find a way to leapfrog Kamala Harris, who's even less popular than Biden. I'm not sure how they do that. It'll be interesting. I think it's going to be it's going to be an amazing year. And of course, it's coupled with the fact we've got another 8 million fighting age men have come across the southern border. So I don't see the power.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know definitely the oligarchy wants to get rid of nation states. That's a theme. I've seen that as a theme for a very long time. Is that world government must supersede nation states because sovereign nation states are irrelevant, incapable of dealing with global issues. That's why we need a managerial class of technocratic elite who are scientifically managing the system according to scientific principles. Now, I'm not against the idea of using scientific principles, but it has to be tied in some way to the idea of the sacredness of human life, the idea that there's like natural law at play, whereas these technocrats seem to just be obsessed with control, feudalism, making us stupid and depopulated, and not really, they don't really seem to have much of a love, let's just say, for humanity. If anything, it's the very opposite. It's a death cult. At this point, if the U.S. was to be able to bring back the sort of thing, the taking down of the too big to fail structure, the removing of the legal loopholes that allow for corporations to get all of these, to basically have the power of God and to act a little bit more in their actual self-interest, build things again. In what sort of steps do you think could be taken, or what would that look like?
Well, you talk about the technocrats. Let me touch on that one first, because I think the history of the technocrats are very important. It was a big movement in America in the 1920s and 30s, and they had to go into hiding because when you take technocracy to the nth degree to its ultimate conclusion, it looks like Nazi Germany. And when people saw what the technocracy, some of the things that happened then, they, basically the technocrats went into hiding for 40 or 50 years in America. Funny side note, Elon Musk's grandfather was the president of the Canadian Technocracy Party. I always think that's a fun side note. You mentioned earlier China, with the Brick and Road initiative. And we've been talking about Putin quite a bit this week because he was on Tucker. I think that anybody who really wants to understand what Russia's all about needs to read the Primakov Doctrine. And it talks about the 3 pillars of Russian foreign policy. And this was written in 1998. Putin was a student of Primakov. And one of the things he talks about was getting Russia out from underneath the control of the monopolar dollar hegemony. And that's basically what he's done. He's executed the Primakov Doctrine. And it's well reasoned, and if you're a Russian, it makes a ton of sense. I'm American, and I'm a patriot. I'm wearing a flag right here, so I love my country, but I don't necessarily appreciate its actions or that of the corporations that have caused it to do on their behalf. So what does it look like? I think decentralized. I think we really have to decentralize the power. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The U.S. government's 90% bigger than it should be, and 95% of the stuff that Congress does, they have no authority to do in the first place. If we're going to pretend to be a constitutional republic, you read the Constitution, and perhaps that requires a convention of states. I'm a big fan of that, and I think that may have to happen, but it's got to start with state nullification, like what's happened with Texas. So as important as the presidential
When you say
election,
state nullification, do you mean like secession, or what does that mean? State nullification? I just don't know what that means.
Basically, when the Constitution was written, the Supreme Court was not the arbiter of whether something was constitutional or not. If Congress passed a bill that the state said was not constitutional, they would just say, no, we're not going to do that. You have no power to enforce it. The states are the sovereign, not the federal government. If the federal government does things it's not supposed to, the states can say no. And they have every right to do that. That's why I was such a proponent of Carrie Lake's campaign. I wanted her to be governor because she was, would be the first governor that really had the guts to say no. And you get enough states doing that. No, it doesn't end in secession. What it does is say, look, we've got a constitutional crisis. Let's sit down in convention and discuss this openly and transparently and see what needs to be fixed. The Constitution is a living and breathing document, but the way it's supposed to be changed is through called the amendment process, not by winning 50% plus one of the vote in one single election. You have to go through the amendment process and convince 3/4 of the states that a change needs to be made. And we can do that. We can get back to being a constitutional republic.
Right.
That has to be the end game.
Well, I think, definitely the deliberative process is vitally important, because the idea of a sovereign nation is that it's made up of sovereign people. And to be a sovereign person means you know how to use your mind in conjunction with your morality and your conscience in order to use reason and reason through conversations with people who you disagree with. And to the degree that we have faith that we can all do that and not just agree to disagree, we're in a place where we can get somewhere. You can actually have healthy dispute, healthy competition, healthy dialogue that brings about some sense of compromise, some sense of win-win outcomes. And if you don't have that, and you just have the will of the powerful over the weak, well, you get exactly what we've always gotten throughout history, which is systems of feudal empire run by hereditary elites who don't like us, managing divided and conquered squabblers who are too busy fighting over their scraps and their little local differences that they can't see what they have in common. So I think that we have a lot of history teaching us these lessons on what not to do, how not to fall for these traps, and what is it that human beings, being human, are actually able to do when we fight for our freedoms in an effective way versus a garbage way. So I do think that that's very valuable, that you are able to bring a lot of that history to the conversation. I don't necessarily know if I completely agree with the assessment fully on John Locke yet, but that's another side conversation to go into in the future. There's something that I wanted to just point out before we round out. Edward Snowden not Edward Snowden. I'm so sorry. Julian Assange is going to be facing a possible extradition to the United States soon. What is your thoughts on Assange and the fight right now to release Assange, to bring some justice to that situation currently?
Well, I hope, first of all, wishing him good health. I mean, the last videos I saw of him, he's not looking that good. Apparently Julian Assange knows whether Russia actually hacked the DNC back in 2016. If he can unravel that, an awful lot of what's happened since between Russiagate, Spygate, all kinds of scandals that our federal government has done to basically on the premise that Russia was spying, it's a world-changing event. So I want him to come back home and actually testify. What do you know, Julian?
Absolutely. That's a good point. That's a very good point. And keep in mind that TNT will be broadcasting from various locations throughout London, starting February 20th to the 21st during this case. And so people can follow that on today's News Talk TNT Radio and tntradio.live. And for you, where do people reach you, Brady?
Rumble is on my main channel. You can find me at war_hamster. I'm on Twitter at war_hamster1776. True Social under war_hamster. And I am a guest every Sunday night on Patriot Soapbox at 8 p.m. Eastern on DLive.
All right. Thank you. So till next week, this has been Connecting the Dots on TNTradio.live.